Welcome back. This video will cover Learning Objective 10.4, analyze different theories of measuring relationship satisfaction, and research regarding breaking up. In this part of the chapter, what you're going to be exploring is several models that have been proposed to help us understand why people stay in relationships and why they leave them. Social exchange theory is a theory that comes out of a combination of different disciplines. It's used in sociology, it's used in behavioral economics, a lot of different contexts. So it's been applied to many different kinds of human social behaviors. Attraction is only one of them. The theory is based on the idea that people's feelings about their relationships are going to be affected by how they perceive the rewards and costs associated with that relationship. There'll be thoughts about what you believe the rewards are in the relationship, everything from companionship to economic security to friendship to intimacy to sex, children, whatever the rewards are that you perceive. And then there's the perceptions of costs. Is there dissatisfaction? Is there economic instability in the relationship? Whatever those costs are. Then there's the perception of what's the relationship they think they deserve. And if there's an imbalance, like if there are more costs than there are rewards, that can breed dissatisfaction. Add to that, if you perceive that you deserve better, that increases the dissatisfaction. On the other hand, if the rewards are higher than the costs and you perceive this is the relationship you want and need, then you're likely to be more satisfied. So it's a pretty simple, straightforward theory. Rewards, just to clarify, are any of those positive, emotionally rewarding, gratifying aspects of relationships that keep us happy with them. Whereas the costs are everything from time to being dissatisfied with the emotional qualities of your partner, whatever they are. What we tend to do in our thinking about our relationships is we compare. So social exchange theory really relies on the idea that humans in their relationships are always going to look outside and then compare their relationship and its costs and benefits with other possibilities. Sometimes it's literal comparisons with other people's relationships, but sometimes it's more about if you were to go with a different partner, what would the cost-benefit ratio be? And then there's, to elaborate on that, what kind of alternatives are out there for you? So, and yes, social exchange theory is very tactical and a little bit cold, to be honest. Like boiling down our romantic relationships to a ledger sheet with costs, benefits, and comparison levels. But that's the way the theory looks at things. So if you look at how social exchange theory plays out in long-term relationships, what researchers have found is that couples do tend early in their relationships to give more of their attention when they're describing their relationships to the rewards. As relationships go on, there's more of a mixture of costs and benefits. If relationships are perceived as giving people in those first few months a lot of rewards, people tend to report also being very satisfied and very happy. The perception of those rewards as relationships mature, even though more perception of costs can emerge, perception of rewards continues to be top of mind for people. So we tend to be biased in the direction of perceiving the rewards unless something pushes us in the other direction. So rewards are always going to be really critically important in the calculus that is our relationships. Over time, as I mentioned before, costs become more salient. So as we are in a relationship and that relationship matures, you learn more about the other person. So let's say that you move from dating and being a committed couple to living together. the fact that you're living together means you're going to be exposed to more of that person, and they are going to be exposed to more of you. Like, what are this person's laundry habits? What are their cleaning habits? Obviously, you're going to be exposed to the possibility of more things landing on your ledger sheet, and that includes costs. As people share their lives, they get more complex and more deep information about them, and that can turn into, looking at those rewards, and are those rewards still enough? Now, a variant of the same kind of logic as what we see in the social exchange model is something called the investment model of commitment. And here, what Rusbelt did in his theory was to, or in the theory, is to define investment as something that people put into the relationship that they believe they will lose if they are no longer in that relationship. And, the word investment makes you think money, but it's not just money that people are investing. They invest time, they invest emotional energy, they invest their property, their choices about careers, about where they live and how they live, and so on. So people's level of commitment to their relationship is going to be connected to how satisfied they are, and that includes that doing that math of rewards, costs, comparison levels, and comparison level for alternative, but also, what they've put in emotionally and otherwise that they might have to give up. So let's say that you've been in a relationship for a long time, and you've built a home together, you've built a life together, you have friendships together, but you're not happy. What would you lose if you left? You might lose friends that you had made in common. You might actually lose property. You lose your investment in your home. You might lose the comforts that you have in that relationship, the things that are still rewarding. You might incur a great deal of new costs, like trying to find a new home, trying to find new friends, and so on. So investments matter. To predict when people will stay in an intimate relationship, you have to measure certain things. You have to measure how satisfied people are with those relationships. You have to measure what they think of the alternatives, and you have to also ask them, what are their investments and how big are they? Because that's going to be a pressure point in their decision-making process. So this is a graphic describing how the investment model works. So you've got rewards, costs, and comparison levels, and those are the math. That's the math that goes into satisfaction with the relationship. And then that satisfaction, you have to then combine that with levels of investment, how much you've invested into the relationship. And the longer we're in relationships, the more investments we tend to make in them. And then there's the quality of alternatives that you might invest in. So basically what Rusbelt is doing is adding some components to the formula that allows us to predict the level of commitment. So the model suggests that if your satisfaction is high with the relationship, so there's more rewards than there are costs, and the comparison level is saying, the alternatives just aren't as good as what I have, you're going to be highly satisfied with the relationship. Your investments may in fact be high, and the quality of alternatives low. That's going to lead to higher levels of commitment to the relationship and greater stability of the relationship. So to put this in graphical terms, when people show high degrees of commitment to staying in their relationships, they tend to show high levels of satisfaction and high levels of investment, and comparatively lower levels of perceiving the alternatives to be good. The opposite is the case when we have people reporting that they're deciding to break up. So their satisfaction is low, their level of investment drops, and then their decision is kind of tilted by higher ratings of the alternatives. So perceiving the alternatives to be more positive than the situation they're in right now. Another kind of business sounding model is equity theory. So we've talked about social exchange and investment. Now we're looking at equity. The idea is that people are going to be happier when they're in relationships where the rewards and costs experienced by the people involved are roughly equivalent. So, if you're getting all the costs and your partner's getting all the rewards, that's an inequitable arrangement. If you're getting all the benefits and your partner's getting all the costs, also inequitable. If you're getting some benefits and costs, your partner's getting some benefits and costs, and the math is roughly equal, then it's perceived as equitable. In inequitable relationships, you have one of the parties is, quote, over benefited, meaning they're getting a lot of rewards. So what might that look like? You could have one partner who works outside the home, gets a lot of free time to pursue hobbies. They may bring home paycheck and put money into the home, but maybe they're not doing any of the housework or very little of it. They're not engaging in a lot of time with childcare, all of those things. But they get meals prepared for them. They get the cleaning done for them. They get the child rearing done for them. They also, get a lot of attention from their partner. They're getting all the benefits. The other person may feel undervalued. Meaning they're having to do all of the heavy in-home labor, the cooking, the cleaning, and while their partner goes outside the home, gets playtime, gets hobby time, gets time with their friends, so they may feel that they're being under-benefited in the context of their relationship. That kind of inequity causes dissatisfaction, mostly for the person who's under-benefited. So the graphic that's presented in your text for this, you have this cartoon image of two people in an exchange relationship where you have equity concerns. You have people who tend to describe themselves as, if they do something nice for their partner, then they want their partner to do something nice for them immediately. So if you're doing a favor, you want to be paid right away because you have equity concerns. You may feel exploited when you do nice things for your partner, but they're not returned. There's also kind of a tit-for-tat tally sheet in people's heads when they're in an inequitable relationship. So they want to keep track of who's putting in time and who isn't. And that tends to reinforce those equity concerns. And then, when you help the other person that you're in this equity exchange relationship with, then it's not going to make you feel good. It's actually going to make, if it's going to make you feel anything, it's going to make you feel exploited. These are called exchange relationships. So basically you're bartering with your time to get whatever you can out of the relationship, but nobody's feeling super great about any of it, right? Now, communal relationships, on the other hand, tend to be more equitable, but not because we're doing the math and requiring each other to do it. It's more the orientation to the relationships is based on responsiveness to other people's needs, to what they need to feel good, to feel valued, to feel accepted. So the idea of doing tit for tat favors and then getting mad when somebody doesn't reciprocate right away isn't relevant. You do nice things for your partner because you want them to feel that their needs are being met. So you're valuing their needs more than your own in those moments. If you're doing nice things for your partner, you're not feeling exploited when you do it. You're feeling like you're giving them love and affection and care to meet their needs. And then when you help that person, when you do something nice for them, you're going to feel good about yourself because what you're doing validates the communal nature of the relationship itself. So what's been found is that if you have two people who really value equity and exchange and they're in agreement about it, they can actually be satisfied in their relationship. At the same time, if you have people in equity relationships or exchange relationships rather, where equity concerns become a source of argument and disagreement, then those relationships are vulnerable to falling apart because they're not based on deeper kind of emotional values, like empathy and concern and care. In communal relationships, they tend to be reported as having higher relationship satisfaction and longevity. But it really it's best when it's equal. So let's say you have a couple and one of them is really big on equity concerns and they tend to take more of an exchange orientation to their relationship, but the other person is more communal driven. That's kind of a recipe for a lot of misunderstanding and the potential for the relationship to become distressed. Now, speaking of distress in relationship, there are a handful of models describing how breaking up happens, how relationships dissolve. Now, remember that a lot of this research is about dating couples, but some of it is about longer term relationships. So what Duck's theory does is it tells us that relationships, when they fall apart, it's not a single event. It's something that evolves over time, that through steps that are both, behavioral and psychological. So you have to imagine you're in a relationship, but your feelings are starting to change. They're not going to change in a heartbeat most of the time. They're going to change gradually. And then eventually you come to the point where there's breakdown. You know that you're unhappy with the relationship. And at some point you reach a threshold where you're like, I can't do this anymore. Then you will move into an interpersonal phase where you're really looking for, remember how dissonance works, you're looking for evidence in your partner's behavior that justifies your feeling that you can't stand this anymore. So you may microanalyze your partner's behavior. You may really start to judge your partner's behavior as justifying your decision, the decision that's forming in your head to leave the relationship. You may start to focus much more heavily on costs, and start looking at what the alternatives might be like. And then finally, sometimes, people will start to express their thoughts, if they feel that they can, but they may do it in coded language, trying to test the waters to see what the partner might be thinking. In fact, the partner may be having exactly the same thoughts, but it's also possible that they're not. Now, the threshold in the interpersonal stage is when they look at all this evidence they've been collecting in their head, that they can say to themselves, somebody looking at our relationship from the outside would say, you'd have good reason to leave. So, sometimes it's really obvious. Maybe your partner's cheated. Maybe your partner is abusive. Maybe your partner's just unpleasant and annoying. Maybe your partner is not holding up their end of the economic bargain, and causing problems there. Whatever it is, if you inside your own head perceive that other people would make the same judgment you're feeling like you need to make, you can say to yourself inside your own head, I'd be justified leaving. Then you move into what's called a dyadic phase, where you confront your partner in clear terms, not in coded language, not in kind of poking and prodding, but you confront the partner, and tell them that you're not happy. That may move in the direction of discussing the relationship, maybe some negotiating. There might be an attempt to fix things. But remember that when you go through this interpersonal phase, or intrapersonal phase rather, what's happening is you're actually going through a process of self-justification. Drag yourself all the way back to the cognitive dissonance chapter. It becomes really hard to reverse that inside our own heads. So basically what you have is, in the dyadic phase, for if someone is really unhappy and they've reached this point of confronting their partner and telling them, this relationship isn't working for me anymore, here are the issues that I have, then attempts at reconciliation may be ineffective, partly because the person is already kind of building a commitment to leave. The partners may engage in their own cost-benefit analysis. And, what's likely to occur in that dyadic phase, so inside the couple, is that there will be a perceived loss of intimacy. If one partner is blindsided by the other partner's decision to leave, the blindsided partner may withdraw and just say to themselves, I have no idea who you are anymore. I don't understand this. I don't know where it came from. And then the partner who has done the confronting may say, how could you not notice how unhappy I was? Those sorts of things. So it can kind of drive the partners into their own respective corners. The threshold here is, described in your text as the I mean it threshold. And it's where, the partner may be saying, what do you mean you're unhappy? I do X, Y, and Z. I try really hard, and I'll do better. And you as the person doing the breaking up say, no, I mean it. I am really unhappy. And that can move you in the direction of a social phase, where you start to do breaking up. And breaking up can sometimes be immediate and final, but often it is a progression where you have, you're negotiating splitting your stuff, splitting your friends. You may start talking to other people. That's why it's called a social phase. You're going to start talking to other people, friends, family, etc., about the fact that you're breaking up. And you may create a narrative that preserves your sense of self in a more positive way, in some cases by blaming your partner. And, that creates sort of a face-saving process where you have stories, accounts, and so on. Sometimes it's really straightforward. My partner cheated on me. I am leaving. And everybody else goes, yup, that's the right thing to do. Or they disagree and say, second chances are, important. You should try and save your marriage or your relationship, whatever. Sometimes the social phase involves pulling your friends together and getting social support. So that's why, you're pulling in these outsiders and getting sort of your friend group involved. Now, if you are in a long-term relationship and you have lots of friends in common, that can also mean your friends get to weigh in and give their opinions. And they also get to decide whose side they're going to take if it's an acrimonious breakup. Now, sometimes people, when they break up, it's mutual, it's agreed upon, and they can remain friends. That is not always possible, especially if people are breaking up in a state of anger and hostility. If people have hurt each other and harmed each other, then the situation can be different. Many times people report that they lose friends when they break up with a partner. And part of it is because when you have friends in common, you will have to cope with the fact that they're going to evaluate your choice. And if they evaluate you negatively, like they think breaking up was your fault, they may separate from you and become friends, more friends with the partner than with you. And that happens, and it can be really sad. It's also part of the calculus that we do. It's one of the costs of breaking up, is changes in your networks of friends and connections. In the when you go back into the intrapersonal after, the threshold moment where you say, yeah, it's done, we are broken up, then you're going to start moving in the direction as a person of re-understanding who you are in the context of having broken up, and trying to discover what happened and how you want to be different going forward. So some people will engage in a lot of trying to figure out what happened, what went wrong, and they may have to engage in, correcting the record, if you will. They may put out their own version of their breakup story. I see a lot of this on TikTok. There seems to be a whole excuse me, a whole genre of breakup videos, and it's usually people describing all of the sins committed by their ex and making them look bad, and now I am so happy to be free of this baggage kind of thing. It's really not that simple in real life. That may look entertaining on social media, but in real life, people can go through a grieving process and experience anxiety and worry and concern when they're moving through this final phase of breaking up. At the same time, some people feel very liberated. They feel free from the stress and conflict of a relationship that wasn't working. So the process tends to move in this way, according to this researcher, but everybody's experience of breaking up and ending relationships is a little bit different. One thing we know about from multiple researchers, Russ Belt and others, is what relationships that are in trouble look like. Many of these relationships include obviously destructive behaviors, and that can include things like actively harming your partner, abusing your partner, threatening, actually leaving, then coming back, destroying property. Being an abusive partner, basically, is an overtly destructive behavior. There's also passive forms of destructive behaviors where you do things like not being willing to deal with your problems in the relationship, ignoring your partner, spending time away from your partner, and just really not trying in the relationship. That's a passively destructive pattern that can accelerate the deterioration of a relationship. In contrast, there are constructive things that you can do. You can actively, if your relationship is in trouble, and there's some dissatisfaction, you can actively move in the direction to try and improve it. You can engage in discussions. You can work on your own behavior. Combine efforts with your partner to work on both of your behaviors. You can go to therapy, which can be really effective, especially if you go at the first sign of challenge. Or even, healthy couples can benefit immensely by going to couples therapy. And you might be saying, why would anyone who's in a happy relationship benefit from couples therapy? Mostly because it helps prevent the kinds of misunderstandings, the kinds of problem behaviors that can become destructive over time. There are passive things that you can do just to simply stay in the relationship, even if there are dissatisfying things going on. You may just say, I'm just going to stick it out. I can handle it. I can put up with the things that I don't like. They're really not that big a deal. I'm going to stay committed to the relationship. So this is like passively hoping that the situation will get better over time by being supportive instead of fighting, instead of discussing, instead of talking it to death, just remaining optimistic and hoping it will get better. Now, as you might guess, actively constructive behaviors tend to be more effective in helping relationships move in a more positive direction. Passive approaches, not so much. I mean, the relationship was unlikely to change when people are simply passively constructive. let's take a look at destructive behaviors in more detail. Destructive behaviors do more harm in comparison to constructive behaviors, which can help your relationship. Once the destructive behaviors, particularly the active ones, but also the passive ones, once they start popping out, they have a more indelible impact than any kind of constructive behaviors you might have exhibited. When a partner gets to the point where they're behaving destructively, either actively or passively, their partner has to do things to match that behavior. So if it's like forcing your partner to respond constructively by force. So you get destructive, and then your partner has to come back in and pick up the pieces to save the relationship. And in some really toxic relationships, you have a dynamic emerge where one partner gets super destructive in their behavior, and the other partner swoops in to kind of try and save the day, because they perceive their partner as having kind of come apart at the seams, and they're going to try and save the relationship and save their partner at the same time. Usually that's not particularly effective. So you have a relationship where you have a lot of ups and downs and a lot of strife, and one person actively trying to fix things and the other one actively trying to tear it down. If you have both partners acting destructively, you have a lot of toxicity and a lot of mutually assured destruction, to borrow a phrase from politics. In some breakups actually take on this form, as your authors call it, fatal attractions, where we're not really talking about death necessarily, but more likely death of the relationship. So here's where you have people who end their relationship with each other, and the qualities are really attractive at the beginning. And the early stages of the relationship may be very exciting, very enticing, but they fade. And then over time, why you're with this person, the why disappears. And that can prompt a whole boatload of destructive behaviors emerging. So, if you come into a relationship because someone was exciting, unpredictable, unusual, different, whatever, that can morph pretty quickly into, I can't count on you. You do these things that are unpredictable. It makes me anxious. This type of situation can create a whole lot of, as you might expect, toxicity, where you can start to relabel behaviors like exciting as unpredictable, or unusual as weird, as different as embarrassing. And then the relationship is just not going to succeed. And it can actually escalate into very, very damaging patterns of behavior. Now, lest we end our discussion of attraction and relationships on a really, really sad note, understand that, we human beings need other human beings most of the time. We want to be with other people. We want to have relationships with people. We want friendships. We want love matches, all of those things. There are ways of maximizing the possibility that your relationships will be successful. And that's primarily by identifying in yourself the places that you need to work on to make yourself a good partner to someone that you care for. When we do that, when we give attention to our partner and we give it in an authentic way, we tend to be rewarded for that. And I'm not talking about rewarded in a tactical way. I'm talking about we tend to get love in return. So that concludes my coverage of Chapter 10.